The rain fell like judgment on Millbrook, Pennsylvania that Friday night in late October, drumming against the windows of Maple Leaf Diner with the persistence of a debt collector who knew you were home. The kind of rain that turned streets into rivers and sent sensible people indoors, leaving only the desperate, the lonely, and the lost to wander through its curtains of gray. Nathan Cole stood behind the counter at 11 minutes past 9 watching droplets race each other down the glass and wondered for the thousandth time how his life had narrowed to this single point, a man in a worn uniform waiting for the night to end so he could go home to his daughter and pretend that everything was going to be fine. He was 34 years old, though the lines around his eyes belonged to someone older, etched there by grief and sleepless nights and the particular exhaustion of raising a child alone. His hair was dark brown, cut short because he could not afford the time or money for anything that required maintenance, and his hands were rough from work, in a way they had never been during his years writing code in climate-controlled offices. Those hands had once danced across keyboards building software for a company in downtown Philadelphia, earning a salary that seemed modest at the time but now felt like a fortune from another life. Health insurance, a 401k, the quiet assumption that tomorrow would be better than today. Then Sarah died, and the architecture of his existence collapsed like a condemned building. The diner sat at the edge of town where Maple Street surrendered to County Road, a single-story building with a flat roof and windows that had not been updated since the Reagan administration. The neon sign outside flickered through the rain, Empul LF Diener, missing letters that no one had bothered to replace because everyone who came here already knew what it was. The parking lot held 6 cars tonight, which was better than average for a Friday. 3 belonged to truck drivers killing time before their next haul, their rigs parked in the gravel lot behind the building. One was Nathan's, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with 180,000 miles and brakes that needed replacing. The other 2 belonged to regulars whose stories Nathan knew by heart. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and grease and the particular staleness of a place that had absorbed decades of cigarette smoke before the ban. Red vinyl booths lined the walls, their seats patched with duct tape in places, and a long formica counter stretched across the front with 12 stools bolted to the floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a pale glow that made people look tired even when they were not. Maple Leaf Diner was not a destination. It was a way station for people passing through or people who had nowhere else to go. Nathan had become one of those people 5 years ago, and sometimes he forgot there had ever been anything else. Bill Harrigan sat at his usual spot at the counter, third stool from the left, nursing his 4th cup of coffee and telling a story Nathan had heard twice before. Bill was 58, a long-haul trucker, with a face like weathered leather and hands the size of dinner plates. He wore the same trucker cap every time he came in, faded blue, with a logo so worn Nathan could no longer read. It pushed back on his head at an angle that made him look perpetually surprised. So there I am, right middle of nowhere, Montana, and the snow is coming down so hard I can barely see the hood of my own rig. Bill's voice carried across the empty diner gravelly from years of cheap cigarettes. I'm hauling 40,000 pounds of refrigerators. Refrigerators, can you believe it? To some warehouse in Billings, and my dispatch is on the radio telling me to keep moving because the customer is threatening to cancel the contract. Nathan refilled Bill's cup, nodding in the right places. The story ended with Bill pulling over to wait out the storm, despite dispatch's protests and a guardrail that had been destroyed by a semi that tried to push through. Bill told it like a parable about wisdom and patience, though Nathan suspected the real lesson was about ignoring authority figures who did not have to live with the consequences of their decisions. You worry too much, you know that, Bill was saying, waving his hand in that dismissive gesture Nathan had come to recognize as affection. Always checking on everyone, making sure they're okay. You're going to give yourself an ulcer. Nathan's response came easy, worn smooth by repetition. Someone has to worry about you, Bill. Might as well be me. I've been taking care of myself since before you were born, kid. And look how well that's turned out. Bill laughed, a deep rumble that shook his shoulders and pushed his whiskey glass away from the edge of the counter. Nathan had been watching that glass all night, tracking how many fingers Bill poured from the flask he thought no one knew about. 3 so far, which was 2 more than Nathan liked to see before Bill climbed back into an 18-wheeler. You're going to fall asleep at the wheel if you keep drinking, Nathan said, keeping his voice light. Not an accusation, not a judgment, just a fact offered between friends. Bill's hand hesitated over the flask in his jacket pocket, then withdrew empty. Fine, but only because you asked nice. In booth 3, Megan Calloway hunched over a nursing textbook, her coffee long since gone cold. She was 19, maybe 20, with hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of late nights and early mornings. Nathan had watched her count out coins more than once, her face going red when she came up short, and he had learned to recognize the particular set of her shoulders when she was doing math in her head, calculating whether she could afford to eat today or whether the money needed to go somewhere more urgent. She was studying to be a nurse at the community college across town, working toward a future that seemed to recede every time she reached for it. Nathan did not know her full story, but he knew enough. Single mother, maybe, or aging parents who needed care, or simply the accumulated weight of being young and poor in a country that had no patience for either. She came in every Thursday and Friday night, ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, and stayed until closing because the diner was warmer than wherever she lived and the light was better for reading. Tonight she had ordered a bowl of soup, $2.99, the loss leader George kept on the menu to fill seats during slow shifts, and nursed it for 3 hours while highlighting passages in her textbook. Nathan had refilled her water glass 4 times without being asked. When he brought her check at the end of the night, he had already crossed out the total and written 0 in its place. The tip line said, "Pay it forward someday." Megan's eyes went wide when she saw it, then shiny with tears she was trying not to shed. "Nathan, I can't. You can." He kept his voice low, private, a conversation that belonged only to them. "And you will. Not to me, to someone else someday when you're in a position to help. But no buts, just say thank you and get back to studying. You've got an exam next week, don't you?" She nodded, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Pharmacology. It's killing me." "You'll pass, you always do." He gathered the check and the empty soup bowl, tucking both against his chest. "And Megan, you're going to be a great nurse, I can tell." He walked away before she could argue, before gratitude could turn into embarrassment, or embarrassment into pride. That was the trick he had learned over 5 years of small kindnesses. Do the thing, then disappear. Let people have their dignity. Let them believe they would have been fine without you, even when you both knew better. At 9 o'clock exactly, his phone buzzed in his pocket. Nathan knew who it was before he looked, could feel the shape of the conversation before it began. He stepped through the swinging doors into the kitchen, where Frank Delgado was scrubbing down the grill with the kind of focused intensity that suggested he was working through something in his head. Frank was 50 years old, with salt and pepper hair and forearms corded with muscle from decades of kitchen work. He had been cooking professionally since he was 16, moving through diners and restaurants and hotel kitchens with the restless energy of someone who had never quite found the place he was supposed to be. Maple Leaf was his latest stop, and Nathan suspected it would not be his last. Frank was too talented for this place, too ambitious, too hungry for something more. But for now, he was here, and he had become the closest thing Nathan had to a friend. "It's Grace," Nathan said, holding up his phone. Frank nodded without looking up from the grill. "Go ahead, I'll watch the floor." Nathan answered on the second ring. "Hey, sweetheart." "Daddy." Grace's voice came through small and sleepy, stretched thin by the miles between them. "I miss you." Something in Nathan's chest clenched tight, a fist around his heart. Grace was 7 years old, all knobby knees and tangled blonde hair, and a smile that could stop traffic. She had Sarah's eyes, that particular shade of green that seemed to change with the light, and Sarah's laugh and Sarah's stubborn streak that emerged whenever anyone told her she could not do something. She was the best thing Nathan had ever done, the only good thing to come out of the worst year of his life, and every night he spent away from her felt like a small betrayal. "I miss you too, baby. When are you coming home?" "Not until late, but Mrs. Patterson is right next door if you need anything, remember." "I know." A pause filled with the soft sounds of a child settling into bed. "I just wanted to say goodnight." "Good night, Grace. I love you to the moon and back. I love you to the moon and back and around again." It was their ritual, the call and response they had developed in the months after Sarah died, when Grace could not fall asleep unless she knew exactly how much she was loved. "Daddy." "Yeah, baby. Will you check on me when you get home, even if I'm sleeping?" "Always, every single night, I promise." "Okay. Good night." "Good night, sweetheart." Nathan stood in the kitchen for a long moment after she hung up, staring at the cracked tile floor and listening to the hum of the industrial refrigerator. 5 years of this, 5 years of missed bedtimes and school plays and the sound of her breathing in the next room. 5 years of working nights so he could be there during the days, trying to compress an entire childhood into the hours between breakfast and dinner. Sarah used to say he was the best father she knew. She would hold Grace against her chest and look at Nathan with such complete trust, such absolute certainty that they were building something beautiful together. He wondered what she would think, now seeing him in this kitchen, in this uniform, counting out tips at the end of every shift and praying they added up to enough. He wondered if she would still be proud. The kitchen doors swung open and Frank stuck his head through. "You okay?" "Yeah." Nathan straightened, tucking his phone back into his pocket. "Just needed a minute." "Take all the time you need. It's dead out there anyway." Frank paused, something shifting in his expression. "Hey, you're doing good, you know that, with Grace, with all of it. Don't let anyone tell you different." Nathan did not know how to respond to that, so he just nodded and pushed back through the doors into the dining room. That was when he noticed the woman in the corner booth for the first time. She did not belong here. That much was obvious from 20 feet away, obvious in the way that a diamond does not belong in a pile of gravel. Her suit was black and sharp, the kind of tailored precision that cost more than Nathan's monthly rent. The fabric caught the light when she moved, subtle and expensive, and the cut emphasized shoulders that were neither broad nor narrow but perfectly proportioned. A watch gleamed on her wrist, gold and silver, with a face so understated it had to be obscene, and her handbag sat on the seat beside her, leather so fine it looked soft even from across the room. She had been sitting there for over an hour. Nathan realized this with a start, trying to remember when she had come in, how he had missed her. One cup of coffee, one slice of apple pie she had barely touched. No phone in her hands, no book, no laptop. Just sitting, watching. Nathan approached with the coffee pot professional smile firmly in place. "Can I warm that up for you, ma'am?" She looked up, and Nathan felt something shift in the air between them. Her eyes were dark brown, almost black, with the kind of intensity that made you want to look away, and the kind of gravity that made it impossible. She was older than him, early 50s, maybe with sharp features and dark hair pulled back in a way that emphasized the angles of her face. Not beautiful in any conventional sense, but striking. The kind of face you would remember. "Hope the coffee's warm enough for this cold night," he added, trying to fill the silence that had stretched too long. "It's fine." Her voice was smooth and controlled, each word placed with precision. She looked back down at her cup. Nathan retreated, unsettled in a way he could not name. There was something about the way she had looked at him, not through him like most customers, but at him, studying him, measuring him against some standard he did not understand. He told himself he was imagining things. Rich people wandered into places like this, sometimes slumming it for reasons known only to themselves. She would finish her coffee, leave a modest tip because wealthy people rarely tipped well, and disappear back into whatever world had produced her. He would probably never see her again. But he could feel her eyes on him as he moved through the diner, and every time he glanced toward the corner booth she was watching. At 10:15, the incident with the drunk happened. He came in through the front door like a storm, middle-aged and red-faced, and radiating the particular anger of a man who had been drinking alone for hours. His clothes were expensive but disheveled, his tie loosened, and his jacket wrinkled, and he moved with the exaggerated care of someone trying very hard to appear sober. "Service," he bellowed, slapping his palm on the counter hard enough to make the salt shakers jump. "Where's the goddamn service in this place?" Nathan set down the coffee pot and approached, keeping his movements slow and unthreatening. "Evening, sir. What can I get for you?" The man's eyes were bloodshot, unfocused, swimming with whatever poison he had been pouring into himself. "Whiskey. Neat. And don't give me any of that bottom shelf crap." "I'm sorry, sir, but we don't have a liquor license. I can offer you coffee or—" The man's face twisted into something ugly. "Coffee? You think I came to this shithole for coffee?" He leaned forward close enough that Nathan could smell the bourbon on his breath. "You know what you are? You're nothing, a nobody, a servant. You exist to do what I tell you when I tell you, and right now I'm telling you to get me a goddamn drink." Nathan felt the familiar heat of anger rise in his chest, but he had learned long ago how to let it pass through him without taking hold. Anger was a luxury he could not afford. Not here, not now, not with Grace depending on him to keep this job. Sir, I understand you're having a difficult night. Why don't you sit down and I'll bring you some coffee on the house? It's cold out there and the man spat on Nathan's shoes. It happened so fast, Nathan almost did not register it. The gathering of mucus, the deliberate aim, the wet impact against the leather he had polished that morning. The diner went silent. Bill half rose from his stool. Frank appeared in the kitchen doorway, dish rag clenched in his fist. That's what I think of your coffee, the man said, his voice dripping with contempt. And that's what I think of you, servant. Peasant. You're beneath me. You're beneath everyone in this room. Nathan looked down at his shoes, looked up at the man, looked at the faces around the diner. Bill frozen in outrage, Frank ready to intervene, Megan shrinking into her booth, and the woman in the corner watching with those dark measuring eyes. Nathan reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean napkin. He crouched down slowly, deliberately, and wiped the spit from his shoes. Then he straightened, tucked the napkin away, and met the man's eyes. Sir, I can see you're going through something tonight. Something painful. I don't know what it is, and you don't have to tell me, but whatever's hurting you, taking it out on strangers isn't going to make it better. Nathan's voice was quiet, calm, almost gentle. Why don't you sit down? Let me call you a cab. The coffee's on me, and you can take as long as you need. The man stared at him, mouth working, something shifting behind those bloodshot eyes. The anger was still there, but underneath it, Nathan could see something else. Something broken. My wife left me. The words came out ragged, torn from somewhere deep. This morning. Took my son. Said I was never home. Said I cared more about money than about them. Said, his voice cracked. She was right. God help me. She was right about all of it. I'm sorry. Nathan meant it. That's a hard thing to carry. I've been drinking since noon. Couldn't go home. Couldn't face the empty. The man's legs buckled and Nathan caught him before he could hit the floor, guiding him onto the nearest stool with an arm around his shoulders. Okay, okay. You're okay. Nathan nodded to Frank, who was already moving toward the phone. We're going to get you a cab. You're going to go home and sleep this off. And tomorrow when your head is clear, you're going to call your wife. Not to yell, not to argue, just to listen. Can you do that? The man nodded, tears streaming down his face. I'm sorry about your shoes, about what I said. I didn't mean. I know, it's already forgotten. Nathan stayed with him until the cab arrived, a yellow beacon cutting through the rain. He paid the fare from his own tips, $23, that would have gone toward Grace's school supplies, and helped the man into the back seat. Just before the door closed, the man grabbed Nathan's hand. You're a good man, better than I deserve. Everyone deserves kindness, sir, even when they forget to ask for it nicely. The cab pulled away and Nathan stood in the rain for a moment, letting the water soak through his uniform. When he turned back to the diner, the woman in the corner booth was still watching. Her expression had not changed, but something in her eyes had shifted. Recognition, maybe, or assessment. Nathan went back inside and finished his shift. At 10:30, she stood and walked to the counter. Nathan met her at the register, punching in her order with practiced efficiency. Just the coffee and pie. Yes. The total came to $8.50. She handed him a credit card without a word, black metal, heavy in his hand, the kind of card that had no limit because its owner did not need one. He ran it, gave her the receipt to sign. She signed it with a pen that probably cost more than his car payment, left the merchant copy on the counter, and walked out into the rain. Nathan looked down at the receipt. The tip line was empty, zero. He felt the disappointment settle low in his gut, familiar and expected. Rich people rarely tipped well. They thought the meal was enough, thought their presence was a gift, thought the staff should be grateful for the opportunity to serve them. He had learned not to take it personally, but tonight it stung more than usual. Tonight, after everything, a zero felt like a judgment. He folded the receipt and moved to clear her table. That was when he saw the envelope. It sat beneath the edge of the plate, white and crisp, folded once. On the outside, in precise handwriting, for the waiter who remembers names. Nathan picked it up. His hands were shaking, though he could not say why. The paper was expensive, heavy stock with a subtle texture, the kind used for formal correspondence. He turned it over, half expecting it to be empty, some kind of cruel joke. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a business card. The paper read, "I need to see you. This is not charity. This is a proposal. Come to Sinclair Industries tomorrow at 10 a.m. Ask for Eleanor Sinclair. Don't ignore this." The business card was embossed with gold lettering on cream stock. Eleanor Sinclair, CEO Sinclair Industries. Nathan knew that name. Everyone did. She was in the news constantly. Forbes, Wall Street Journal, CNN, the kind of person whose movements were tracked and analyzed by people who cared about such things. Sinclair Industries was one of the largest technology and investment firms on the East Coast, an empire built from nothing by a woman who had started in a garage and ended up owning half of Philadelphia's skyline. Eleanor Sinclair was worth $4 billion, give or take, and she had just sat in his diner for over an hour, left zero tip, and told him to come see her. His first thought was that it was a prank, some elaborate setup for a hidden camera show or a bet between bored rich people. His second thought was that it was a scam identity theft, maybe, or some kind of con that would leave him worse off than before. But the card felt real, the weight of it, the quality, the precise handwriting on the envelope, and the way she had watched him all night, those dark eyes tracking his every move like she was cataloging data for some purpose he could not fathom. Nathan slipped the note and card into his pocket and finished his shift in a daze. The rain had not stopped by the time he got home. If anything, it was coming down harder, sheets of water that turned the parking lot of his apartment complex into a shallow lake. Nathan ran from his car to the entrance key, already in hand, and climbed the 2 flights of stairs to apartment 2B. The door was locked. Mrs. Patterson, the elderly widow who lived next door and watched Grace during Nathan's shifts, had gone home hours ago, leaving a note on the kitchen counter. Grace went down easy. "Called for you once around 9 but fell back asleep. Casserole in the fridge if you're hungry." Nathan stood in the dark kitchen reading the note by the light from the stove clock. 2:47 a.m. The apartment was silent except for the rain against the windows and the soft hum of the refrigerator. He left his wet shoes by the door and padded down the short hallway to Grace's room. She was asleep, curled around a stuffed rabbit that had been with her since she was born. Sarah had bought it 3 days before the due date, convinced they were having a boy, and had laughed when Grace came out pink and screaming and absolutely perfect. The rabbit was gray now, worn thin in places, one ear reattached with careful stitching after an incident with the neighbor's dog. Grace called it Mr. Buttons for reasons she had never explained. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched his daughter breathe. In sleep, she looked so much like Sarah it made his chest ache. The curve of her cheek, the way her lips parted slightly, the small furrow between her brows that meant she was dreaming. He loved her with a ferocity that frightened him sometimes. A love that had no bottom, no edges, no conditions. He would die for her without hesitation, would kill for her if necessary, would burn down the entire world if it meant keeping her safe. This was what Sarah had given him in her absence, this terrible, beautiful, all-consuming love that made every sacrifice worthwhile and every failure devastating. "I'm trying," he whispered to the dark room. "God, Sarah, I'm trying so hard." Grace stirred but did not wake. Nathan backed out of the room, pulling the door almost closed, leaving a crack for the hallway light to spill through. In the kitchen, he poured himself a glass of water and sat down at the small table that served as desk, dining room, and homework station. His laptop was open to the email he had received that afternoon, the one he had been avoiding since it arrived. From Millbrook Elementary School. Administration subject important. Update on tuition. Dear Mr. Cole, we are writing to inform you of changes to our enhanced learning program effective next semester. Due to rising operational costs and our commitment to providing the highest quality education for our students, tuition will increase from $1,200 to $2,500 per semester. We understand this may present a financial challenge for some families. Please contact our administrative office to discuss payment plan options or financial assistance programs. We thank you for your continued support of Millbrook Elementary and your commitment to your child's education. Nathan read the email for the 4th time as if the numbers might change if he stared at them long enough. $2,500. His bank account had $340 in it, and payday was still a week away. Grace could not transfer schools. She had friends here, real friends, the kind of connections that took years to build. Her teachers knew, understood her learning style, had helped her through the terrible months after Sarah's death, when she would not speak and would not eat and would not let anyone touch her except Nathan. Millbrook Elementary was the only stable thing in her life. He could not take that away from her, but $2,500. Where was he supposed to find $2,500? The note in his pocket felt heavy. He pulled it out and read it again, the words burning into his brain. I need to see you. This is not charity. This is a proposal. Come to Sinclair Industries tomorrow at 10 a.m. What kind of proposal? What could a billionaire possibly want from a waiter in a rundown diner? Nathan thought about ignoring it. Throwing the note away, forgetting the whole strange encounter, going back to his life of double shifts and careful budgeting, and prayers that the car would hold together for one more month. Rich people did not help poor people without wanting something in return. That was how the world worked. He had learned that lesson the hard way in the months after Sarah's death, when credit card companies called daily and the insurance company found reasons to delay payment, and everyone he had thought was a friend discovered pressing business elsewhere. But then he looked at the email again, at the number that might as well have been $1 million, at the narrow walls of this apartment where his daughter was sleeping and dreaming of things he could not give her. If there was even a 1% chance this could help, even a fraction of a chance that Eleanor Sinclair's proposal was real, was legitimate, was anything other than a cruel joke. Could he really walk away? Nathan did not sleep that night. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rain, thinking about Sarah, about the life they had planned together, about the promises he had made. She had been a nurse at Millbrook County Hospital, working doubles and night shifts and never complaining. Even at the end of a 16-hour day, she would come home with a smile, kick off her shoes, and crawl into bed beside him with stories about the patients she had helped. She believed in people with a faith that Nathan had always envied, saw the good in everyone, even when they could not see it themselves. The night before she died, they had stayed up late talking. Grace was asleep in her crib, and they were sitting on the couch in their old apartment, the nice one with the second bedroom and the dishwasher and the balcony overlooking the park. Nathan was telling her about a promotion he was in line for, a senior developer position that would mean more money and more stability, and maybe finally the down payment on a house. Sarah had listened with that particular intensity. She had the way she gave her full attention to everything and everyone. When he finished, she had taken his hand and said, "Whatever happens, promise me something. Anything. If something happens to me, if I'm not here, give Grace the life I couldn't give her." Nathan had laughed, uncomfortable with the sudden seriousness. "Nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to grow old together. Remember matching rocking chairs on the porch?" "I know." She had smiled, but her eyes were serious. "Just promise me. Please. I promise." She had kissed him then, and they had made love for the last time, though neither of them knew it. The next morning she left for work, and 8 hours later a refrigerator truck ran a red light on Highway 76, and Sarah Cole was pronounced dead at the scene. Nathan had been trying to keep his promise ever since. 5 years of trying, and still he was not sure if he was succeeding or failing. At 6 in the morning, Grace crawled into his bed. Her hair was a mess, her eyes still half closed, and she pressed her face against his shoulder with the absolute trust of a child who has never been let down. "Daddy, did you sleep well?" "I did, sweetheart." The lie came easy. Protecting her from his troubles was second nature now. "I had a dream about Mommy." Grace's voice was soft, muffled against his shirt. "She said she was proud of us." Nathan's throat closed. He pulled her closer, breathing in the smell of her hair, strawberry shampoo, the expensive kind he bought because Sarah used to use it. "She is, baby. I know she is." "Are you going to work today?" "Not until tonight." "We've got the whole day together?" Grace smiled, and something in Nathan's chest loosened. This was why he did it. All of it. The long nights, the aching feet, the customers who looked through him like he was furniture. This smile, this moment, this child who still believed in him. "Can we make pancakes?" "We can make whatever you want." They made pancakes together, Grace standing on her step stool to stir the batter while Nathan supervised. She was getting better at cracking eggs, though shells still sometimes made it into the bowl. They ate at the small table with maple syrup and butter, and Nathan tried not to think about the email or the note or the decision waiting for him. After breakfast, Grace went to play in her room while Nathan cleaned up the kitchen. Through the window, he could see the rain had finally stopped leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, pale light filtering through the gray. He made his decision, standing at that window dish, towel in hand, listening to Grace sing to herself in the next room. He would go to Sinclair Industries, not because he believed in miracles, not because he thought a billionaire would save him, but because refusing to try felt like giving up, and he had promised Sarah he would never do that. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel, the kind that reflected clouds and made you feel small just looking at it. Nathan stood on the sidewalk across the street for 10 minutes before he worked up the courage to cross, watching people in expensive suits flow in and out through revolving doors, talking on phones and checking watches, and moving with the particular confidence of those who had never questioned their right to be anywhere. He was wearing the only suit he owned, the one from his wedding 7 years ago. It was too tight in the shoulders now. He had lost weight in the years since Sarah's death, the wrong kind of weight muscle melting away as stress ate at him from the inside, and the pants were a little short and the tie was slightly out of style. But it was the best he had. Grace had helped him pick it out that morning, solemn and serious as she evaluated his options. "You look handsome, Daddy," she had said, and he had tried to believe her. The lobby of Sinclair Industries smelled like expensive cologne and fresh flowers. The floors were marble white, streaked with gray, polished to a shine that reflected the massive chandelier overhead. A reception desk sat in the center of the space, staffed by two women in matching blazers who looked like they had never encountered a problem they could not solve. Nathan approached his shoes, squeaking against the floor in a way that seemed obscenely loud. "I'm here to see Eleanor Sinclair." His voice came out rougher than he intended. The receptionist, young blonde with a smile that did not reach her eyes, looked up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "She asked me to come. My name is Nathan Cole." Something shifted in the receptionist's expression. She picked up her phone, murmured something Nathan could not hear, listened for a moment, then hung up. When she looked at him again, there was surprise where skepticism had been. 38th floor, the elevator on the left. Nathan nodded and walked toward the elevators, feeling eyes on him from every direction. He did not belong here. Everyone could see it. His cheap suit, his scuffed shoes, the way he moved like he was expecting someone to stop him at any moment. The elevator was paneled in dark wood with a mirror on the back wall that showed Nathan exactly how out of place he looked. He watched the numbers climb 10, 15, 20 and tried to calm his breathing. What was he doing here? What could Eleanor Sinclair possibly want from him? The doors opened onto a hallway of glass and polished steel. A young man in an expensive suit was waiting, hands clasped in front of him, expression professionally neutral. "Mr. Cole, right this way." They walked past offices where people sat at desks that probably cost more than Nathan's car, past conference rooms with views that stretched to the horizon, past a break room with the espresso machine that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. Everyone they passed glanced at Nathan with the same expression: curiosity, assessment, dismissal. He was a novelty, an anomaly, something to be observed and then forgotten. The assistant stopped at a set of double doors at the end of the hall and knocked twice before opening them. "Mr. Cole is here." Eleanor Sinclair stood behind a desk that could have contained Nathan's entire apartment. The office was massive, all clean lines and natural light. Windows ran from floor to ceiling, looking out over the city like the view from a throne room. The walls held no art, no photographs, nothing personal, just white space and angles, and the kind of deliberate minimalism that only the very wealthy could afford. She wore a different suit today, charcoal gray with a subtle pinstripe, and her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look sharper than she had in the diner. More powerful, more dangerous. "Thank you, Michael." Her voice carried across the space, smooth and controlled. The assistant nodded and withdrew, closing the doors behind him. Eleanor gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "Please, sit." Nathan sat, gripping the arms of the chair to keep his hands from shaking. Up close, Eleanor Sinclair was even more intimidating than she had been from across the diner. There was something about her presence that demanded attention, that filled the room and left space for nothing else. She did not sit immediately. Instead, she walked to a small table near the window where a coffee maker sat, expensive, the kind that ground beans fresh. "Coffee? Sure." She made 2 cups in silence, moving with the precision of someone who did everything deliberately. It struck Nathan as strange watching a billionaire pour coffee. He had expected servants, assistants, an army of people whose job was to ensure Eleanor Sinclair never had to lift a finger. She brought both cups to the desk and sat across from him, pushing 1 cup forward. Her eyes met his over the steam, and Nathan felt again that sense of being measured. evaluated. Thank you for coming. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. I wasn't sure you would. Nathan wrapped his hands around the cup. It was warm, solid, real in a way the rest of this felt impossibly unreal. With all respect, Miss Sinclair, why am I here and why the zero tip? Something flickered in her expression, amusement maybe or approval. The tip was a test. I needed to see how you would react to being overlooked. Heat flared in Nathan's chest. You tested me like some kind of experiment. Yes. She did not flinch from his anger, did not look away. And you passed. You didn't curse me, didn't complain to your coworkers, didn't even frown. You just said thank you and wished me a good night. Nathan stood the chair scraping against the floor. I don't know what kind of game this is, but I'm not interested. It's not a game. Eleanor's voice stayed level. Sit down, please. He stayed standing, heart pounding in his chest. I came here because I thought maybe you needed something. That maybe this was real, but you're just bored. You wanted to see what the poor waiter would do. I need someone who treats people with dignity, regardless of their status. Eleanor stood as well, meeting his eyes. I've been looking for months. I watched you for an hour in that diner. The way you handled the drunk, the college girl who couldn't pay. The phone call with your daughter. You were kind when no one was watching. That's rare. So you insult me to prove a point. I test you to make sure you're real. She walked around the desk closer now, and Nathan could smell her perfume, subtle, expensive. Nothing like the floral scents Sarah used to wear. Eleanor Sinclair smelled like power, like decisions that moved markets and changed lives. I'm offering you a trial, she said, community outreach manager for a program I'm launching. $75,000 a year, full benefits, and a scholarship for your daughter at one of the best private schools in the state. The number hit Nathan like a physical blow. $75,000. He made $23,000 a year working 60 hours a week. $75,000 was more than he could comprehend, a sum so vast it seemed fictional. What do you want from me? His voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. I'm just a waiter. I don't have a degree in community outreach. I don't have connections or experience or anything that would make me qualified for this. What could I possibly do for you? Eleanor returned to her desk and picked up a folder. You've been there. You know what it's like to work 2 jobs and still come up short, to smile at people who don't see you, to make choices no one should have to make. I need someone who won't treat struggling families like charity cases, someone who will see them as people. She handed him the folder. He opened it, hands trembling. Inside were documents, spreadsheets, photographs. The header on the first page read, Second Chances Initiative. Nathan read through it, slowly turning pages with increasing disbelief. A program for single parents in difficult circumstances. Job training and placement assistance. Childcare support. Educational grants for their children. Mental health counseling. Financial literacy courses. The budget ran into the millions, 10 million for the first year alone, with plans to expand. You want me to run this. I want you to help build it, to make sure it actually helps people instead of just making me feel good about myself. Eleanor sat back in her chair watching him process. You have 3 days to think about it. If you say yes, you start in 2 weeks. Nathan closed the folder. His hands would not stop shaking. This is too much. There has to be a catch. The catch is that you'll work harder than you've ever worked in your life, that you'll carry the weight of knowing that families are depending on you, that you'll have to make decisions that affect real lives every single day. She met his eyes. If that sounds easy, then you're not the right person. He wanted to say yes. God, he wanted to. Grace's tuition, the overdue electric bill, the car that needed new brakes before winter. $75,000 would change everything, would transform their lives overnight, but nothing was free. Not like this, not from people like her. I need to think about it, he said. Eleanor nodded. 3 days, you have my number. He left the folder on her desk and walked out, moving through the hallways and the elevator and the marble lobby like a man in a dream. His hands did not stop shaking until he was back on the street, standing in the October sunshine, staring up at the tower of glass and steel where Eleanor Sinclair waited for his answer. That night at the diner, Nathan told Frank about the meeting. They were in the kitchen during the dinner rush, steam rising from the industrial dishwasher, the clatter of plates and the sizzle of the grill filling the spaces between words. Rich people don't give, Nathan. They buy. Frank was scraping the grill with hard, angry motions, his jaw set tight. What do you think she wants to buy from you? I don't know. That's what scares me. Diana pushed through the kitchen doors with a tray of dirty plates, her apron splattered with what looked like ketchup. She was maybe 25, working her way through cosmetology school, saving up to open her own salon someday. I heard about Sinclair. My cousin worked for one of her companies. She's ruthless in business, fires people without blinking. You sure you want to get involved with someone like that? Nathan leaned against the counter, the doubt that had been growing all day wrapping tighter around his chest. I don't know what I want. You want to take care of your kid. Frank's voice was softer now, some of the anger fading. We all get that. Just make sure you're not trading one kind of broke for another. The words stuck with Nathan through the rest of his shift, through the drive home, through the hours of lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. Trading one kind of broke for another. Was that what he was risking? But then he thought about Grace's face when she asked for the science book at the store. The way she had already learned not to ask for things, to calculate in her head whether wanting something was worth the pain of not getting it. 7 years old, and she had already absorbed the lesson that dreams were expensive and disappointment was free. That was his own kind of broke, and Nathan was not sure he could afford it anymore. After his shift ended at 2 in the morning, Nathan did not go straight home. Instead, he drove to the 24-hour grocery store on the corner and sat in the parking lot with his laptop using the store's Wi-Fi to search for Eleanor Sinclair. Pages of results appeared. Articles about her company, interviews about her philanthropy, a Forbes profile from 2 years ago. He clicked through them methodically, reading everything he could find. Most of it was what he had expected. Self-made billionaire. Technology industry. Started her company in a garage and built it into something worth billions. Known for being ruthless in business negotiations, but generous with charitable causes. Divorced, no children, rarely seen in public except at industry events and charity galas. But then he found an older article buried several pages deep. It was from a local newspaper dated 2010 in the archives section. Nathan almost did not think to check. The headline read, "From Waitress to Boardroom." Eleanor Sinclair credits late mother's work ethic. Nathan read it twice, his heart beating faster with every word. The article mentioned that Eleanor's mother, Margaret Sinclair, had worked as a waitress for over 20 years, raising her daughter alone after her husband died of a heart attack when Eleanor was just 3 years old. Margaret had worked 2 jobs most of her life, sacrificing everything to put Eleanor through school. Margaret Sinclair died in 2018. The article did not say how, only that she passed after a long illness. Nathan stared at the screen. Eleanor Sinclair's mother had been a waitress, a single parent, just like him. He kept searching, driven by an instinct he could not name. There had to be more to this story. Some reason Eleanor had come to that diner, had watched him for an hour, had left that note. After another hour of searching, he found it. A local newspaper article from 2003 buried in the archives of the Millbrook Gazette, the newspaper of his own town, the place he had lived his entire life. The headline read, "Community Rallies to Help Injured Waitress." Nathan read with his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Margaret Sinclair, 42. A waitress at Morton's Diner in Millbrook was seriously injured last week when a drunk driver struck her vehicle on her way home from work. She suffered a broken back and will require multiple surgeries. Her daughter Eleanor, at 18, is reportedly devastated and worried about the mounting medical costs. But the community has rallied around the family. A local construction worker, Robert Cole, who regularly ate breakfast at Morton's, organized a fundraiser at the town hall. The event raised over $30,000, enough to cover most of Mrs. Sinclair's medical expenses. "Maggie always remembered my name," Mr. Cole said when asked why he organized the effort. "She asked about my son every morning, even when I could barely afford to tip her. When someone treats you with that kind of dignity, you pay it back. That's just how the world should work." Nathan read the name again. Robert Cole. His grandfather's name was Robert Cole. He scrolled down looking for more and found a photograph accompanying the article. 2 people standing in front of a banner that read, "Millbrook Cares." One was a woman in her early 40s, thin and tired, but smiling, her arm in a sling. The other was a man Nathan would have recognized anywhere. Robert Cole, Grandpa Bob, the man who had raised Nathan's father alone after Nathan's grandmother died, who had taught Nathan to fish and to fix cars and to always shake hands with a firm grip. The man who had sat Nathan down after Sarah's death and told him that grief was a journey, not a destination, and that the only way through it was through. The man who had died 4 years ago peacefully in his sleep 2 weeks before his 82nd birthday. Nathan's grandfather had helped Eleanor Sinclair's mother. 20 years ago in this very town, Robert Cole had organized a fundraiser to save a waitress he barely knew. And now Eleanor Sinclair was sitting in a diner watching his grandson pour coffee, leaving notes about proposals and second chances. Nathan sat in his car in the grocery store parking lot, staring at the photograph on his laptop screen, and felt the world shift beneath him. This was not random. Eleanor had not stumbled into Maple Leaf Diner by accident. She had been looking for him, tracking him down, watching him to see if he was the same kind of man his grandfather had been. The note in his pocket suddenly meant something different. Not a test, not a game, a debt, an offering, a circle beginning to close. Nathan drove home as the sun was coming up, the sky turning pink and gold over Millbrook. Grace was still asleep when he let himself in, and he stood in the doorway of her room for a long time, watching her breathe, thinking about his grandfather and Eleanor's mother and the strange threads that connected people across years and miles and circumstances. He thought about Sarah, too, about her belief in people, about the promise he had made. At 7 in the morning, Nathan called the number on Eleanor's card. She answered on the first ring as if she had been waiting. "Mr. Cole, I need to know the real reason." No introduction, no pleasantries. "Why me?" "The actual reason." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Then, "Come back to my office, 2 o'clock. He was there at 1:45. This time Eleanor met him in the lobby herself. She was wearing a simpler outfit today. Dark slacks, a cream blouse, minimal jewelry, and something about her seemed less guarded, more human. She led him not to her office, but to a smaller conference room, one with a single window and a view of the parking garage instead of the skyline. The furniture was simpler here, the space more intimate. This was a room for private conversations, not power plays. Eleanor sat across from him at the table. For the first time since Nathan had met her, she looked uncertain. "My mother's name was Margaret." Eleanor's voice was steady, but her hands were folded tight on the table. "She raised me alone. My father died of a heart attack when I was 3. She worked as a waitress at a place called Morton's Diner, right here in Millbrook. 2 shifts a day, sometimes 3. She was exhausted all the time, but she never complained. Not once." Nathan listened, not interrupting. Outside the window, clouds moved across the sun, sending shadows rippling across the floor. "When I was 18, she got hit by a drunk driver on her way home from work. Broke her back. 3 surgeries, months of physical therapy. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. We were going to lose everything." Eleanor's voice remained controlled, but something trembled beneath the surface. An old pain, barely contained. "There was a man who used to come into Morton's every morning. My mother said he was poor, a construction worker, could barely afford breakfast. But when he heard what happened, he organized a fundraiser. Got the whole neighborhood involved. Raised enough to cover most of the bills." She looked out the window at the gray sky and the gray concrete and the cars moving silently below. "My mother tried to find him after she recovered. Wanted to thank him, pay him back somehow. But he was gone. Moved away, someone said. She never got to thank him. It bothered her for the rest of her life." Eleanor turned back to Nathan, her dark eyes meeting his. His name was Robert Cole. Nathan felt the words hit him like a physical blow, even though he already knew. Hearing her say it made it real in a way his late-night research had not. "My grandfather. He died 5 years ago. I found out too late." For the first time, there was a crack in Eleanor's voice. "I'd been looking for him for years after I made my money. I wanted to pay back everything he did for my mother. But by the time I tracked him down, he was gone. So you found me instead." "I found you because you're his grandson, but I stayed because of what I saw in that diner." Eleanor leaned forward, her intensity filling the space between them. "My mother used to say that Robert Cole always remembered her name, even though she was just the woman who poured his coffee, even though he had nothing and she had less. He saw her as a person, not as a servant." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a photograph, old crease, the colors faded. Nathan recognized it immediately, the same photo he had found online, his grandfather and Eleanor's mother, standing in front of the Millbrook Cares banner. You do the same thing, Eleanor said quietly. You see people, you remember their names. You treated that drunk last night with more dignity than most people would treat their own family. That's not something you can teach. It's not something money can buy. It's in you the same way it was in your grandfather. Nathan took the photograph with trembling hands. His grandfather looked young in the picture, younger than Nathan was now. There was a strength in his face, a quiet confidence that Nathan remembered from his childhood. Grandpa Bob, who always had time for him, who taught him that real men were kind, not cruel, who died peacefully in his sleep before Nathan could tell him that he had become a father, that he had named his daughter Grace, that he was trying so hard to be the kind of man his grandfather would be proud of. This is about your mother, Nathan said, his voice rough. This is about honoring what she valued, what she taught me. Eleanor's voice was firm now, the uncertainty gone. I'm not choosing you because you're poor, Nathan. I'm choosing you because you're good. There's a difference. Nathan wanted to believe her, wanted it with an intensity that surprised him. For 5 years, he had believed that the world was transactional, that kindness was weakness, that the only person he could rely on was himself. But here was Eleanor Sinclair, one of the richest women in America, sitting across from him in a conference room and talking about his grandfather like he was a hero. What if I fail? The words came out before Nathan could stop them. What if I'm not good enough? My mother wasn't good enough by society's standards. Eleanor's voice was gentle now, almost tender. She never finished college. She worked minimum wage her whole life. She died in a tiny apartment with furniture she'd had since I was born. But she was good. She was the best person I ever knew. She reached across the table and touched his hand, a gesture so unexpected that Nathan flinched. You don't have to be perfect, Nathan. You just have to care. The rest we'll figure out together. Nathan looked at the photograph in his hands, at his grandfather's face, at the banner behind them. Millbrook Cares. 20 years ago, Robert Cole had helped a stranger because it was the right thing to do. He had not expected anything in return, had not known that his act of kindness would ripple forward through time, touching lives he would never see. And now that ripple had reached Nathan, had brought him to this room, this moment, this choice. I need to talk to my daughter, he said finally. Eleanor nodded, of course. That evening, Nathan made Grace her favorite dinner, mac and cheese from a box with hot dogs cut up in it. It was not fancy, not nutritious, not anything a parenting book would recommend, but it was what Sarah used to make on special occasions, and the smell of it always made Grace smile. They ate at the small table, knees almost touching in the cramped kitchen, and Nathan watched his daughter devour her food with the unself-conscious joy of a child who had not yet learned to worry about carbs or calories or any of the thousand things adults use to torture themselves. Grace, I need to talk to you about something important. She looked up, a string of cheese hanging from her chin. Okay, Daddy. Nathan wiped her face with a napkin, buying himself time to find the right words. Someone offered Daddy a new job. A really good job with more money than we've ever had. It would mean I could be home for dinner every night. I wouldn't have to work at the diner anymore. Well, maybe just one night a week, but not every night. Grace's eyes went wide. Really? Really, but it's a big decision, and I wanted to ask you what you think. She considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. Would we have to move? No, baby. Same apartment, same neighborhood. Same school, same friends, same everything, except Daddy would be around more. A smile spread across Grace's face, so bright it was almost blinding. Then you should do it, Daddy. I miss you at dinner. Nathan felt his throat close. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, breathing in the strawberry smell of her hair. I miss you too, sweetheart, every single night. So you'll take the job? I think I will. Yes. Grace pulled back her green eyes, Sarah's eyes meeting his. Mommy would be proud of you, Daddy. I know she would. Nathan could not speak, could only nod and hold his daughter and let the tears come. Later, after Grace was asleep, Nathan sat on the couch with his laptop and the photograph Eleanor had given him. He had spent the last hour going through old photo albums, comparing pictures, confirming what he already knew. The man in the photograph was definitely his grandfather. The woman was definitely Eleanor's mother, and the connection between them, the act of kindness that had changed both their lives, was definitely real. Nathan thought about everything that had led to this moment. His grandfather's breakfast at Morton's Diner, a drunk driver on a dark road, a fundraiser at the town hall, a woman who never got to say thank you, and then 20 years later, a billionaire in a corner booth watching a waiter pour coffee, looking for something she had lost. The story was almost too perfect, too neat, like something out of a movie where everything happened for a reason and every thread eventually connected. But life was not a movie. Life was messy and random and cruel, full of accidents and coincidences and near misses. Sarah had died on a Tuesday afternoon because a truck driver was running late and decided to run a red light. There was no reason, no purpose, no grand design, just chaos wearing the mask of fate. And yet, and yet here Nathan sat holding a photograph of his grandfather, about to accept a job from a woman whose mother had been saved by that same grandfather's kindness. Maybe it was not fate. Maybe it was not destiny. Maybe it was just one of those strange, improbable things that happen sometimes when the universe decided to be kind. Or maybe, and this thought came to Nathan, slowly rising up from somewhere deep, maybe kindness was its own kind of fate. Maybe every act of generosity, every moment of grace, every time someone chose to see another person as worthy of help, maybe all of those moments were seeds planted in soil that would not bear fruit for years or decades or generations. Robert Cole had planted a seed in 2003 when he organized that fundraiser. He had not known what would grow from it, had not expected anything to grow at all. But the seed had taken root in Eleanor Sinclair's heart, and now 20 years later, it was bearing fruit that Nathan could almost taste. Give Grace the life I couldn't give her. Sarah's words echoed in Nathan's mind as clear as if she were sitting beside him. Maybe this was how he was supposed to do it. Not alone struggling and failing and barely surviving, but with help, with community, with the accumulated kindness of generations reaching back through time to lift him up. Nathan picked up his phone and called Eleanor's number. She answered on the second ring. "I'm in," he said, "but I have conditions." "I'm listening." Her voice was steady, unsurprised. 6 months trial period. I don't take the scholarship for Grace until I've proved I can do the job. I keep working one shift a week at the diner to remember where I came from. And every decision about the program goes through me. I'm not a figurehead. If I do this, I do it right. There was a brief silence. Then, "Deal. You're tougher than I thought. I learned from watching my wife work doubles. When can you start?" "2 weeks. I need to give George proper notice." "2 weeks." Eleanor's voice warmed slightly, the first hint of emotion Nathan had heard from her. "Welcome aboard, Nathan." He hung up and sat in the dark living room, listening to the sounds of the building settling around him. The refrigerator humming, a car passing on the street below, Grace's soft breathing from the next room. Somewhere in the silence, Nathan could almost hear his grandfather's voice speaking words that had shaped his childhood. The measure of a man isn't what he has, it's what he gives. Nathan had never fully understood that until now, had never grasped how a single act of generosity could ripple forward through time, touching lives that had not yet been lived. His grandfather had given what he could time energy organization, and in return, 20 years later, his grandson was being given a chance. The weight of that gift settled over Nathan like a blanket. It was not just money Eleanor was offering, not just an amount. It was a legacy, a continuation, a thread connecting him to his grandfather and his grandfather to Eleanor's mother, and all of them to something larger than themselves. He thought about the families he would be helping through the Second Chances initiative. Single parents like him struggling to make ends meet. Children like Grace learning too young that the world was not fair. People who had been overlooked and forgotten, who had started to believe that no one cared. He could not save all of them, could not fix every broken life or heal every wound. But maybe he could plant some seeds of his own. Maybe he could be, for someone else, what his grandfather had been for Margaret Sinclair, a stranger who saw them, who helped them, who made them believe that kindness still existed in the world. Maybe that was the real inheritance Robert Cole had left him. Not money, not property, not anything that could be measured or counted. Just this, the example of a life lived with open hands and an open heart. Nathan stood and walked to Grace's room. She was asleep, curled around Mr. Buttons, her face peaceful in the glow of the nightlight. He stood in the doorway and watched her breathe and made a silent promise. I will give you the life your mother wanted for you. I will work harder than I have ever worked. I will be the father you deserve. And someday when you are grown and the world has tested you, you will remember that kindness is never wasted, that every act of grace matters, that we are all connected across time and distance and circumstance by the simple choice to see each other as worthy of love. The next morning, Nathan called George at the diner and gave his 2 weeks' notice. George was understanding. He had known Nathan's situation for years, had cut him breaks when money was tight and shifts when Grace was sick. You're doing the right thing, George said, his gruff voice softened by something that might have been pride. That kid of yours deserves a father who's not dead on his feet. I'm going to keep one shift a week if you'll have me. Friday nights. You don't have to do that. I want to. This place, Nathan trailed off, searching for words. This place kept me alive when I didn't know how to keep going. I'm not ready to walk away completely. George was quiet for a moment. Then Friday nights. You've got 'em. The 2 weeks passed quickly, a blur of final shifts and paperwork and preparation. Eleanor sent over documents to review budgets, organizational charts, profiles of the nonprofit partners they would be working with. Nathan read everything twice, making notes in the margins, asking questions that sometimes surprised Eleanor with their insight. You understand this better than people with master's degrees in social work, she said during one of their planning calls. I understand it because I've lived it, Nathan replied. Every family you want to help, that was me 3 years ago. I know what they need because I needed it too. On his last full night at the diner, Frank pulled him aside after closing. The kitchen was quiet, the grills cold, the fryers emptied and cleaned. They stood in the loading dock, the October air cold against their faces, stars visible through the gaps in the clouds. I was wrong about you, Frank said. About the jaw, about Sinclair, about all of it. You were trying to protect me. I was scared for you. There's a difference with Doraemon. Frank lit a cigarette, the flame casting brief shadows on his weathered face. My whole life I watched people like us get chewed up by people like them. Rich folks who make promises, then forget them the minute it's inconvenient. I didn't want that for you. I know. But you're not like me. You're not scared of them. Frank took a long drag, exhaling smoke into the cold air. Or maybe you are scared, but you do it anyway. That's braver than I've ever been. Nathan did not know what to say. He and Frank had never talked like this, had never moved past the easy banter of coworkers into anything deeper. The vulnerability felt strange, like wearing clothes that did not quite fit. I'm still going to be here Friday nights, Nathan said finally. Still going to be the same person. The job doesn't change who I am. I know. Frank dropped his cigarette and ground it out with his heel. But maybe it changes who you can become. And maybe that's not a bad thing. They stood in silence for a moment, two men who had learned not to expect much from life, contemplating a future that might be different. Take care of yourself, Nathan, Frank said, and walked back inside. Nathan stayed on the loading dock a little longer, looking up at the stars. Somewhere up there, Sarah was watching. He had to believe that. Had to believe she could see what he was trying to do, what he was trying to become. I'm going to make you proud, he whispered to the sky. I promise. The stars did not answer, but the wind shifted, carrying with it the smell of autumn and change, and Nathan felt something loosen in his chest. Maybe that was enough. On his first day at Sinclair Industries, Nathan wore his wedding suit for the last time. Eleanor had offered to advance him money for new clothes, but he had refused. He wanted to walk into this new life, wearing the old one, wanted to carry that reminder of where he had been. The security guard at the front desk did a double take when Nathan gave his name. Clearly, word had spread about Eleanor Sinclair's unusual hire. The whispers followed him to the elevator, onto the 38th floor, down the hallway to his new office. It was small by the standards of this building, just enough room for a desk, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf, but it had a window that looked out over the city, and a door that closed, and his name on a placard beside the entrance. Nathan Cole, Community Outreach Director. Nathan stood in the doorway and let that sink in. 3 weeks ago, he had been pouring coffee and dodging drunks and praying his car would make it through another winter. Now he had an office, a title, a salary that would change everything. He sat down at the desk and turned on the computer. The screensaver was the Sinclair Industries logo rotating slowly against a field of blue. He watched it for a moment, then opened the folder Eleanor had given him. Second Chances Initiative. This was real. This was happening. And starting today, he was responsible for making it work. There was a knock on his open door. He looked up to find Michael Eleanor's assistant standing in the doorway with a tablet in his hands. Ms. Sinclair asked me to give you this, your schedule for the first week. She's blocked out time for orientation meetings with the partner organizations and a session with HR to get you set up in the system. Thank you. Nathan took the tablet, scanning the dense calendar. Every hour was accounted for, every minute scheduled. This was going to be nothing like the diner. Also, Michael said, lowering his voice, a word of advice. The other executives, some of them aren't happy about your hiring. They think Ms. Sinclair is being, he searched for a diplomatic word, unconventional. You mean they think I don't belong here? Michael's expression was carefully neutral. I mean they're going to be watching you closely, looking for reasons to say they were right. I understand. Nathan set the tablet down on his desk. Thank you for the warning. Mr. Cole, Michael hesitated at the door. My mother was a single parent too. She worked 3 jobs to get me through college. People like us, we have to work twice as hard to get half as far. But we can do it. You can do it. Thank you, Michael. After he left, Nathan sat alone in his office and looked out the window. The city spread out before him, towers of glass and steel, thousands of lives unfolding in apartments and offices and cars. Somewhere out there were families like his single parents, struggling children going without people who had given up hope. He was going to find them. He was going to help them. And he was going to prove that Eleanor Sinclair had made the right choice. The first meeting of his first day was with the board of directors. Eleanor had warned him it would be intimidating, but nothing could have prepared him for the reality. The conference room was enormous, dominated by a table of polished mahogany that could have seated 20. The walls were lined with photographs of Sinclair Industries' achievements, groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, and handshakes with politicians. The 12 board members sat in high-backed leather chairs, their combined net worth probably exceeding the GDP of small countries. Nathan took his place in a smaller chair near the end of the table, feeling every eye in the room on him. His wedding suit suddenly felt cheap and obvious, a costume rather than clothing. Richard Blackwood sat at Eleanor's right hand. He was 62 years old with silver hair swept back from a tanned face and eyes the color of slate. He had been on the board since before Eleanor took over, one of the original investors who had helped the company grow from a garage operation to a global enterprise. According to the briefing materials Nathan had studied, Blackwood owned 8% of Sinclair Industries, enough to make him very wealthy and very influential. He was also, according to Michael's whispered warnings, the loudest voice against the Second Chances initiative. This is a technology company, not a charity, Blackwood said within the first 5 minutes of the meeting, his voice carrying across the room. We're here to create value for shareholders, not to fund social experiments run by people with no relevant experience. He did not look at Nathan as he spoke, but the implication was clear. Eleanor's response was measured, controlled. The initiative is funded from my personal philanthropic budget, Richard. It doesn't affect shareholder returns. It affects our brand, our reputation. Blackwood leaned forward, his silver cufflinks catching the light. What happens when this program fails? When the newspapers write stories about Sinclair, industries wasting money on feel-good projects while real businesses struggle? The program won't fail. You can't know that. You've put a waiter in charge of a multi-million-dollar initiative. A waiter. Blackwood's lip curled slightly. With all due respect to Mr. Cole, expertise matters. Experience matters. We wouldn't let an amateur run our R&D department. Why are we letting one run this? Nathan felt his face flush. The urge to defend himself rose up hot and urgent, but he forced it down. This was not the diner. He could not handle Richard Blackwood the way he had handled the drunk, with patience and kindness and the hope of human connection. Or maybe he could. Mr. Blackwood. Nathan's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room. May I say something? Blackwood's expression flickered with surprise. He had not expected Nathan to speak. By all means. You're right that I don't have experience in corporate philanthropy. I don't have an MBA or a social work degree or any of the credentials you would expect from someone in this position. Nathan kept his voice steady, his hands flat on the table. But I do have something that can't be taught. I know what it's like to be the person this program is trying to help. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each board member in turn. 3 years ago, my wife died. I had a 2-year-old daughter and a job I couldn't keep because I needed to be home with her. I applied for assistance programs, and half of them treated me like a number, like a case file, like my humanity was an inconvenience they didn't have time for. No one interrupted. No one looked away. The programs that actually helped, the ones that made a difference, were run by people who understood, people who had been where I was, who knew that what I needed wasn't just money or job training. I needed someone to look me in the eye and tell me I wasn't a failure, that asking for help didn't mean I was weak. Nathan turned to face Blackwood directly. You want to know what qualifications I have? I have years of watching my daughter go without things other kids take for granted. Years of working double shifts and still coming up short. Years of learning how to stretch a dollar until it screamed. That's my expertise. That's my experience. And it's something you can't buy with all the money in this building. The silence stretched. Blackwood's expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality that revealed nothing. Finally, Eleanor spoke. I think we've covered enough for today. Richard, your concerns are noted, but the program will proceed as planned. The meeting ended shortly after. As the board members filed out, Blackwood paused beside Nathan's chair. His voice was low, meant only for Nathan's ears. That was a nice speech, very touching. He straightened his cufflinks, a precise, deliberate gesture. Enjoy it while it lasts. People like you don't survive in places like this. You're a charity case, and eventually everyone will see it. He walked away before Nathan could respond. Eleanor appeared at Nathan's elbow a moment later. Don't let him get to you. Richard's been angry since I took over the company. He thought he was next in line for CEO. He's going to be a problem. Almost certainly. Eleanor's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. But I've been dealing with Richard Blackwood for 15 years. I know how to handle him. Nathan was not so sure. There had been something in Blackwood's eyes, not just anger or resentment, but something colder, more calculated. He filed the warning away and returned to his office to prepare for the next meeting. There would be time to worry about Richard Blackwood later. Right now, he had a program to build. The first month was harder than anything Nathan had imagined. The office on the 38th floor felt like foreign territory, a country where he did not speak the language or understand the customs. The other employees looked at him with suspicion, whispering when he walked by. That's the guy Eleanor plucked from a diner. No degree, no experience, nothing. Just showed up one day. Must be nice to have connections. Nathan heard it all, even when they thought he could not. He did not defend himself, did not try to explain. He just worked. Arrived early, stayed late, read every file on struggling families until his eyes burned. Learned the systems, made calls, built relationships with nonprofits and job placement agencies. He still wore the wedding suit for the first 2 weeks until Eleanor finally insisted on advancing him money for a proper wardrobe. Even then, he bought conservatively dark suits, plain ties, nothing that would draw attention. He wanted to be invisible, wanted his work to speak for itself. The Second Chances initiative launched 6 weeks after Nathan started. By then, he had spent countless hours shaping it into something real. Not just handouts, real support. Job training programs with company partners willing to hire people who had gaps in their resumes. Childcare assistance that did not require a PhD in bureaucracy to access. Educational grants that did not make parents feel like beggars. The first family Nathan helped personally was Maria Santos. 34 years old, 2 children, husband, who had walked out 2 years earlier, leaving her with nothing but debt and desperation. She worked night shifts, stocking shelves at a grocery store, earning just enough to keep a roof over their heads, but not enough for anything else. Nathan met her in her tiny apartment in the public housing complex on the south side of Millbrook. 2 children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 5, sat on the floor doing homework, while Maria stood in the doorway with her arms crossed, suspicion written across her face. I don't want charity. Her voice was hard, defensive, the voice of someone who had been disappointed too many times. I don't want anyone looking at me like a charity case. I understand. Nathan met her eyes. I'm a single parent too. My daughter is 7. I know what it feels like when people look at you with pity instead of respect. Something shifted in Maria's expression. The suspicion did not disappear, but it softened slightly. What exactly are you offering? Nathan explained the program. A medical billing certification course, 4 months of training that would qualify her for jobs in hospitals and clinics. Placement assistance afterward with partner organizations that had agreed to hire program graduates. Childcare support during the training period so she would not have to choose between learning and earning. And after, Maria's voice was still guarded. What happens when the training is done and the childcare support runs out? After you have a career, not a job, a career, with benefits and retirement and the kind of stability that lets you plan for the future instead of just surviving the present. Maria was quiet for a long moment. Her son looked up from his homework, watching his mother with eyes that were too old for his face. Okay, Maria said finally. I'll try. 3 months later, Maria Santos completed her certification at the top of her class. The hospital where Nathan had placed her hired her at twice her previous salary. On her first day of work, she sent Nathan a photograph of her children smiling in front of their new apartment, a real apartment with a bedroom for each of them and a kitchen where the stove actually worked. The text with the photograph said, "You were the first person who looked at me like I could do this. Thank you." Nathan saved the message in a folder on his phone. It was the first of many. Frank was the second person from Nathan's old life to come through the program. He showed up at Nathan's office on a Wednesday afternoon, hat in his hands, looking uncomfortable, surrounded by all the glass and steel. "I shouldn't have doubted you." Frank's voice was gruff, embarrassed. "About the job, about Sinclair, about everything. You were trying to protect me, I know that." Frank sat down heavily in the chair across from Nathan's desk. "I heard about your program, about what you're doing for people, and I thought," he trailed off staring at his hands, "I thought maybe there was room for an old kitchen guy who wants to be more than a short-order cook." Nathan smiled. "Let me see what I can do." 2 weeks later, Frank was enrolled in a culinary program at the community college training to become a sous chef. The program covered tuition and connected him with a mentor at one of the best restaurants in downtown Philadelphia. Within 6 months, he would be earning twice what he had made at the diner. "You changed my life," Frank told Nathan over beers one evening after class. "You know that, right? I was going to die in that kitchen. Now I have a future." "You always had a future. You just needed someone to help you see it." Frank shook his head. "No, I needed someone to believe in me. That's different. That's what you gave me." They clinked bottles and drank in comfortable silence. Outside the bar window, the city lights glittered against the dark sky. One act of kindness rippling forward. Nathan thought about his grandfather, about Eleanor's mother, about the strange threads that connected them all. Maybe this was what Robert Cole had felt all those years ago. The quiet satisfaction of making a difference. The knowledge that something you did would outlast you. Nathan hoped so. He hoped his grandfather was watching somewhere and was proud of what his legacy had become. The program grew, 50 families by the end of month 3, 100 by month 5. Local news started covering it, first skeptically, then with growing interest as the success stories accumulated. Former participants began volunteering, giving back to the program that had given them a chance. Nathan turned down every interview request. "This isn't about me," he told Eleanor when she asked why. "It's about them. The moment I become the face of this thing, it stops being about the people we're helping." Eleanor had nodded slowly, something like respect in her eyes. "You're smarter than you look, Nathan Cole." "I'll take that as a compliment." "You should." But as the program grew, so did the attention. Not all of it welcome. Richard Blackwood had not forgotten Nathan's speech at the board meeting, had not forgiven Eleanor for overruling him. And somewhere in the shadows, he was planning something. Nathan did not know it yet, did not sense the danger gathering like storm clouds on the horizon. He was too busy building something good, too focused on the families depending on him, too exhausted from the work of turning pain into hope. The storm would come soon enough. But for now, in this moment, Nathan Cole stood at the window of his office and watched the sun set over Philadelphia. Grace was at home with Mrs. Patterson doing homework and waiting for him to finish his day. Eleanor was in a meeting somewhere doing the work of running an empire. The families he had helped were building new lives brick by brick. And Nathan was starting to believe for the first time since Sarah died that maybe the world was not as cruel as he had thought. Maybe kindness could win. Maybe he could be part of that victory. He thought of his grandfather's photograph tucked into his desk drawer, thought of Eleanor's mother who had never gotten to say thank you, thought of Sarah who had believed in people until her last breath. I'm doing it, he whispered to all of them. I'm really doing it. The city glittered below him, full of lives and stories and struggles he would never know. But somewhere out there, because of what he was building, someone was getting a second chance. That was enough. For now, that was enough. The storm arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, 4 months after Nathan had first walked into Sinclair Industries, wearing his wedding suit and carrying nothing but hope. He was in his office reviewing applications when Michael appeared in the doorway, his face pale and tight, with something that looked like dread. The tablet in his hands trembled slightly, and Nathan knew before a single word was spoken that whatever came next would change everything. There's an article. Michael's voice was barely above a whisper. Online, it went live 20 minutes ago and it's already spreading. Nathan took the tablet and read the headline, Billionaire Sinclair plucks waiter from diner for high-paying position. What's the real story? The article was poison dressed as journalism, speculation about why a successful CEO would hire someone with no qualifications, questions about their relationship that stopped just short of actionable defamation. Anonymous sources claiming Nathan had been seen leaving Eleanor's office late at night. Implications that the Second Chances initiative was nothing more than an elaborate cover for something sordid. Nathan's hands went cold. His vision narrowed to the words on the screen, each one a knife sliding between his ribs. 4 months of work, hundreds of families helped, all of it reduced to gossip and innuendo by someone who had never met him, never seen what he was building, never cared about anything except clicks and controversy. Who wrote this? Michael hesitated. Thomas Webb. He's an investigative reporter for the Philadelphia Tribune. But Nathan, he stopped, swallowed, started again. Someone from inside the company talked to him. Someone gave him access to internal emails, personnel files. This wasn't just research. This was a leak. The weight of that statement settled over Nathan like a shroud. Someone at Sinclair Industries wanted him gone badly enough to feed information to a reporter. Someone who had access to confidential documents. Someone who knew exactly where to aim to cause maximum damage. Richard Blackwood's face flashed through Nathan's mind, slate gray eyes and silver hair, and that cold smile that never reached his eyes. But he pushed the thought away. Suspicion was not proof. Anger was not strategy. Does Eleanor know? She's in a meeting with legal right now. She asked me to keep you informed. Nathan nodded slowly, his mind racing through implications and consequences. The article was damaging, but it was not fatal, not yet. If they responded quickly, clearly, with evidence of the program's success, they might be able to contain the fallout. But even as he thought it, his phone began to buzz. Text after text, notification after notification. The story was spreading faster than they could possibly respond. By noon, every local news outlet had picked it up. By 3 o'clock, it was trending on social media. By the time Nathan left the office at 7, there were reporters camped outside the building, shouting questions he could not answer and accusations he could not refute. He drove home through streets that felt hostile, past billboards and storefronts that seemed to mock him. The weight of public judgment pressed down on his shoulders, heavier with every mile. When he arrived at the apartment complex, Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the hallway. Her face told him everything he needed to know before she spoke a single word. Grace had a hard day. The elderly woman's voice was gentle, but her eyes were worried. Some children at school, they heard things. From their parents, I think. They were saying things to her. Nathan's heart stopped. What kind of things? That you're a gold digger, that you're only pretending to help people. Mrs. Patterson reached out and touched his arm. She doesn't understand the words, Nathan, but she understood the cruelty. He found Grace in her room, curled on the bed with Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest. She was not crying. That was almost worse. She had retreated somewhere deep inside herself, the way she had in the months after Sarah died, when the world became too much and silence was the only defense she had. Nathan sat on the edge of her bed and waited. He had learned in those terrible months that pushing only made things worse. Grace would speak when she was ready. Finally, in a voice so small it barely existed, "Daddy, did you do something bad?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His daughter, his 7-year-old daughter, was asking if he was a criminal, if the father she trusted had betrayed that trust. No, baby. He had to force the words past the tightness in his throat. Daddy didn't do anything wrong. Then why are they being mean? How do you explain media cruelty to a child? How do you make her understand that some people destroy things simply because they can? That innocence is no protection against malice. That the truth matters less than the story people want to believe. Sometimes people don't understand things, and instead of asking questions, they make up their own answers. Those answers aren't always true, but it hurts anyway. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, Lily said her mom said you're using the nice lady for money. I told her that wasn't true. I told her my daddy is good. Nathan pulled her into his arms and held her tight, feeling her small body shake with the effort of being brave. She was defending him. 7 years old, and she was standing up to bullies on his behalf. It broke something in him. Cracked the foundation he had been building these past 4 months and let the doubt come flooding in. What was he doing? What gave him the right to put his daughter through this? She had already lost her mother, already endured more than any child should have to bear. And now, because of his ambition, because he had dared to reach for something more, she was being tormented by classmates whose parents read tabloid journalism and believed the worst. I love you, Grace. His voice cracked on her name. I love you more than anything in the world, and I'm going to fix this, I promise. But even as he said it, he did not know how. That night, after Grace finally fell asleep, Nathan sat in the dark living room with his phone in his hands. Eleanor had called 3 times. He had not answered. Michael had texted updates. The legal team was preparing a response. The PR department was drafting statements. Eleanor was meeting with the board to discuss next steps. None of it mattered. None of it could undo the damage already done to his daughter's heart. Nathan thought about everything he had built in the past 4 months. The families he had helped. The lives that had changed. Maria Santos now thriving at the hospital. Frank halfway through his culinary training. Diana saving money for her salon. All the others, dozens and dozens, who had been lifted up by the program he had designed. Was it worth it? If saving strangers meant sacrificing his daughter's peace, was it worth it? The answer came to him in the darkness, clear and terrible. No, nothing was worth that. Nothing could justify putting Grace through more pain. He picked up his phone and dialed Eleanor's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp with concern. Nathan, I've been trying to reach you. I can't do this. The words came out flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. I can't let my daughter suffer because of me. Oh, Nathan, listen to me. The money isn't worth her dignity. I'm sorry, I can't. He ended the call before she could respond. In the silence that followed, Nathan stared at the ceiling and felt the weight of his decisions settle over him. He was giving up, walking away, abandoning everything he had built because the cost had become too high. Sarah would understand. She had always put Grace first. She would have made the same choice. Wouldn't she? The doubt crept in like smoke under a door. Sarah had believed in fighting for what was right. She had worked double shifts in a hospital, dealing with ungrateful patients and indifferent administrators because she believed in the mission. She had never given up, never backed down, never let the world's cruelty convince her to stop trying. What would she think of him now? Of her husband, who had been given an opportunity to help hundreds of families running away at the first sign of trouble? Nathan did not sleep that night. He lay in bed, watching shadows move across the ceiling, listening to Grace's soft breathing through the thin walls, and wondered if he was making the right choice or the easy one. By morning, he had no answers, only exhaustion and the hollow certainty that his time at Sinclair Industries was over. At 7:30, someone knocked on his door. Nathan expected Mrs. Patterson or perhaps a reporter who had found his address. Instead, Eleanor Sinclair stood in the hallway of his apartment building, looking completely out of place in her expensive coat and designer heels. May I come in? He let her in because he did not know what else to do. She looked around the tiny apartment, the second-hand furniture, the toys scattered across the floor, the walls that needed painting, and her expression revealed nothing. Grace wandered out of her room, still in her pajamas, hair a mess of tangles. She stopped short when she saw the stranger. Daddy, who's that? Eleanor crouched down, bringing herself to Grace's eye level. Her movements were stiff, unpracticed, the gestures of someone who did not spend much time around children, but her voice was gentle. Hello, Grace. I'm Eleanor. Your father works with me. I brought you something. From her bag, she produced a book, hardcover, colorful, the kind Grace had been eyeing at the bookstore for months. A children's science book filled with pictures of planets and animals and the human body. $15, which might as well have been 100 in the days before Nathan took this job. Grace's eyes went wide. How did you know? Your dad told me you liked science. Eleanor smiled, and for a moment she looked almost human. I thought you might enjoy this. Grace looked at Nathan uncertain. He nodded, and she took the book, carefully cradling it like something precious. Thank you. Her voice was small, overwhelmed. Eleanor stayed crouched, her eyes level with Grace's. Your father is the bravest man I know. He said no to a lot of money because he loves you, because he wanted to protect you. That's what real fathers do. Grace's lip trembled. But the kids at school don't know what they're talking about. Eleanor's voice was firm now, carrying an authority that silenced doubt. My mother was like your dad. She worked hard. People looked down on her sometimes, but I was proud of her. And you should be proud of your father. He's a good man. Don't let anyone tell you different. Grace nodded, tears running down her cheeks. She clutched the book to her chest and looked at Nathan with something that might have been understanding. Eleanor stood and turned to face him. I'm handling the newspaper. They'll print a retraction, or they'll face a lawsuit they can't afford. I've already contacted Grace's school. If any child harasses her again, there will be consequences. She met his eyes, and Nathan saw something there he had not expected. Not pity, not condescension, something that looked almost like solidarity. If you walk away, I respect that. But know this, you're not doing this for money. You're doing this so other families don't have to feel what you're feeling right now. Your daughter will be proud, not because you're rich, but because you help people. She walked to the door, then paused. 3 days, Nathan. That's what I said when this started. You still have one left. After Eleanor departed, the apartment felt different. Smaller somehow, but also less suffocating. Nathan sat on the couch and watched Grace page through her new book, her face alight with wonder as she discovered each new image. His phone buzzed, a text from Michael. The leak came from Richard Blackwood's office. We have evidence. E wants to meet. Nathan stared at the message for a long moment. Blackwood. Of course it was Blackwood. The man had been working against the program since the beginning, had made no secret of his contempt for Nathan and everything he represented. But even knowing the source did not change the damage. The story was out there, spreading like wildfire. Grace had been hurt. The program's reputation was in tatters. What difference did it make who lit the match if the house was already burning? Another text, this one from an unknown number. Mr. Cole, this is Thomas Webb from the Tribune. I have information you should see. Call me. Nathan deleted it without responding. Whatever game Webb was playing, he wanted no part of it. The third message came at 2 in the morning when Nathan had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep. His phone rang with a number he did not recognize, and something made him answer. Mr. Nathan Cole. The voice was female, professional, with an undertone of practiced sympathy that immediately put him on edge. Speaking. This is Sandra Mitchell from Montgomery County Child Protective Services. We've received an anonymous report regarding the living conditions and supervision of your daughter, Grace. The words did not make sense at first. They were sounds without meaning, syllables that refused to arrange themselves into comprehensible language. I'm sorry, what? The report alleges that you work night shifts and leave your daughter without adequate supervision. That you're unable to provide a stable environment due to financial instability and irregular hours. Nathan sat up in bed, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. That's not true. None of that is true. I have a neighbor who watches Grace during my shifts. She's never alone. She's never. Mr. Cole, I understand this is distressing. We're required to investigate all reports regardless of their source. A caseworker will be visiting your home within 48 hours to assess the situation. The phone nearly slipped from Nathan's shaking hands. Someone had reported him to Child Protective Services. Someone was trying to take Grace away from him. Who made the report? He could barely form the words. The report was anonymous, Mr. Cole. I can't disclose. This is a lie. Someone is lying about me to hurt me. This is... He stopped, forced himself to breathe. Anger would not help. Panic would not help. He needed to think. A caseworker will contact you to schedule the visit. In the meantime, I suggest you gather any documentation that supports your claims. Character reference and proof of child care arrangements, financial records. The call ended, and Nathan sat in the darkness of his bedroom phone clutched in his trembling hands. Someone had reported him to CPS. Anonymous. Malicious. Designed to destroy him in the most personal way possible. Blackwood. It had to be Blackwood. The leak to the press, and now this. A coordinated attack aimed at removing Nathan from the program, and if possible, from his daughter's life. Nathan did not sleep for the rest of the night. He sat at the kitchen table organizing documents, making lists, preparing for a battle he had never imagined fighting. Bank statements showing regular deposits, letters from Mrs. Patterson confirming her role as caregiver, report cards from Grace's school, photographs of the apartment clean and safe and filled with a child's artwork. By morning, he had assembled a file that would prove to any reasonable person that Grace was loved, cared for, protected. But reason had nothing to do with this. Someone with power and resources was trying to destroy him, and Nathan was not sure reason would be enough. At 7 o'clock, he called Eleanor. "I know who did this." His voice was steady now, cold with a fury he had not known he was capable of feeling. "Blackwood reported me to Child Protective Services. He's trying to take my daughter." Eleanor's response was immediate. "I'll have Carl Hensley, my personal attorney, at your apartment within the hour. We'll fight this, Nathan." And Blackwood. A pause, then, "Richard thinks he's playing chess. He doesn't realize I've been watching him for years, waiting for him to make exactly this kind of mistake. He just exposed himself. We'll use it." 3 hours later, Carl Hensley sat in Nathan's living room reviewing the CPS documentation with the focused intensity of someone who had won battles far more difficult than this one. He was 60 years old, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades navigating the legal system and knew every one of its secrets. The report was filed from an email address created specifically for this purpose, Carl explained. "We've traced the IP address to Richard Blackwood's home network. That's not proof he personally made the report, but it's enough to establish a pattern of harassment." "What about CPS?" Nathan's voice was tight with anxiety. "What happens when they come?" "They'll interview you, inspect the apartment. Talk to Grace probably, though, given her age, they'll be gentle. They'll also contact Mrs. Patterson and anyone else you list as a regular caregiver." Carl closed his folder and met Nathan's eyes. "The good news is that you have nothing to hide. Grace is healthy, happy, well cared for. Anyone who spends 5 minutes in this apartment will see that. And if they don't, then we fight. We challenge the report's validity, expose its malicious origins, and pursue legal action against whoever filed it." Carl's voice hardened. "But I don't think it will come to that. CPS investigators are trained to identify genuine neglect. They're also trained to recognize when someone is weaponizing the system for personal vendettas. This report will be closed within a week. I'd stake my reputation on it." The caseworker arrived the next afternoon. Her name was Linda Chen, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that Nathan found strangely reassuring. She walked through the apartment, asked questions about his work schedule and childcare arrangements, and spoke briefly with Grace about her school and her friends and whether she felt safe at home. Grace answered every question with the unself-conscious honesty of a child who had nothing to hide. Yes, she felt safe. Yes, Daddy made her breakfast every morning. Yes, Mrs. Patterson was always there when Daddy had to work. Yes, she was happy. When Linda Chen left, she shook Nathan's hand and said, "Mr. Cole, it's clear to me that your daughter is thriving. I'll be recommending that this case be closed. You should receive official notification within the week." Nathan thanked her, closed the door, and stood in the empty apartment with tears streaming down his face. Relief and rage warred within him, relief that Grace was safe, rage that someone had forced them through this nightmare. He would not forget. He would not forgive. And he would not stop until Richard Blackwood faced consequences for what he had done. That evening, Grace climbed onto his lap while he sat on the couch staring at nothing. "Daddy," her voice was small, tentative. "Are you sad?" "A little, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay." She was quiet for a moment, her small fingers playing with a button on his shirt. "Then, Daddy, if you can help other kids like me, why don't you?" The question was so simple, so direct that it cut through all of Nathan's defenses. He looked down at his daughter, 7 years old, wiser than she had any right to be, and saw Sarah looking back at him. "What do you mean, baby?" You help people. That's your job now, right? You help mommies and daddies who are sad and scared like you were when mommy died. Grace's eyes were serious, searching. If you stop, who's going to help them? Nathan had no answer. The question hung in the air between them, demanding a response he was not sure he could give. The mean people at school, they don't matter. Grace's voice was firm now, carrying a certainty that seemed to come from somewhere beyond her years. Mr. Buttons says you shouldn't let mean people win. He says you're supposed to be brave. Nathan pulled her closer, breathing in the strawberry scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her small body against his chest. When did you get so smart? I learned from you and Mommy. In that moment, Nathan understood what he had to do. Grace was right. Running away meant letting the bullies win, not just Blackwood and Webb and whoever else was trying to destroy him, but all the small cruelties that had accumulated over a lifetime of being overlooked and underestimated. He had been given a chance to make a difference. His grandfather had taken that same chance 20 years ago when he organized a fundraiser for a waitress he barely knew. Robert Cole had not run when things got hard. He had fought. Nathan would do the same. I'm going back, he told Grace. I'm going to keep helping people. And if anyone tries to stop me, I'm going to fight. Grace smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her in days. Good, that's what I thought you'd say. The next morning, Nathan called Eleanor. I'm in. His voice was strong now, clear of doubt. But we need to deal with Blackwood. He came after my daughter. That can't stand. It won't. Eleanor's voice held something Nathan had not heard before, a cold fury that matched his own. Richard has been undermining me for years. The leak to the press, the CPS report, that's just the latest chapter. But he made a mistake this time. He left evidence. What kind of evidence? The kind that will cost him his seat on the board and possibly his freedom. Carl is preparing the case now. By the time we're done, Richard Blackwood will wish he had never heard your name. Nathan hung up and looked out his kitchen window at the gray February sky. Somewhere out there, families were struggling. Children were going without. Parents were making impossible choices between food and medicine, between rent and childcare, between survival and dignity. He could help them. He was helping them, and no one, not Richard Blackwood, not Thomas Webb, not anyone was going to stop him. The battle was just beginning. But for the first time since the article dropped, Nathan felt ready to fight. The call came at 6 in the morning on a Thursday in late March, 5 weeks after the CPS investigation had been closed and Richard Blackwood's schemes had been exposed to the board. Nathan was making breakfast for Grace when his phone buzzed with Michael's name on the screen. Eleanor collapsed. Michael's voice was tight with panic. She's at Pennsylvania Hospital. They're running tests now, but it looks like exhaustion. Maybe worse. Nathan felt the floor shift beneath him. Eleanor Sinclair was the foundation everything else was built on. Without her, the Second Chances Initiative, the protection from Blackwood, the entire structure of hope they had constructed together, or all of it became fragile. I'm on my way. He dropped Grace at Mrs. Patterson's with a hurried explanation and drove to the hospital faster than was safe, weaving through morning traffic with his heart pounding against his ribs. The waiting room was already filling with Sinclair Industries executives when he arrived, their expensive suits and worried faces creating a tableau of corporate anxiety. Michael met him at the elevator. The doctors are saying chronic exhaustion, stress-induced arrhythmia. She's been working 90-hour weeks for months, running the company, overseeing the initiative, dealing with Richard's attacks. Her body finally gave out. Is she going to be okay? They're keeping her overnight for observation, but Nathan, Michael's voice dropped. Richard is already making moves. He called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon. He's going to try to use this. The board meeting convened at 2 o'clock in the same conference room where Nathan had first faced Richard Blackwood's contempt. This time, Eleanor's chair sat empty at the head of the table, and Blackwood had positioned himself as close to it as possible without actually sitting in it. Nathan was not invited. He came anyway. The security guard at the door tried to stop him, but something in Nathan's eyes made the man step aside. He pushed through the double doors and stood at the end of the table facing 12 board members who looked at him with expressions ranging from surprise to hostility. Mr. Cole, Blackwood's voice dripped with false concern. This is a closed meeting. I'm afraid you will have to leave. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have a seat at this table. You're an employee, and frankly, given the controversies surrounding your hiring, perhaps not for much longer. Nathan ignored him, turning instead to address the other board members. I know why you're here. Richard wants to use Eleanor's illness as an excuse to shut down the Second Chances initiative. He's been trying to destroy it since the day it launched, and now he sees his chance. This is about fiscal responsibility. Blackwood's voice rose with indignation. The initiative has cost this company millions with no clear return on investment. It's time to cut our losses. Millions, Nathan laughed, though there was no humor in it. You want to talk about us? Let me tell you about Cons. Maria Santos was working minimum wage, struggling to feed her kids one bad month away from homelessness. Now she's a hospital administrator, earning $60,000 a year. She pays taxes. Her children are in school instead of on the streets. That's return on investment. He moved around the table, meeting each board member's eyes in turn. Frank Delgado was 50 years old, trapped in a dead-end job, convinced he would die behind a grill in a diner that didn't even pay him enough to retire. Now he's opening his own restaurant, hiring employees, creating jobs. Harold Morrison served 2 tours in Vietnam, lost his wife and daughter, and was raising his granddaughter on a veteran's pension that barely covered rent. Now that child has a scholarship, and Harold is helping other veterans find the support they need. Nathan stopped at the head of the table, standing where Eleanor should have been. You want to talk about return on investment? Every family we help is a family that doesn't need government assistance. Every parent we train is a worker who contributes to the economy. Every child we educate is a future taxpayer, a future employee, a future citizen who believes that the system works because someone showed them it could. Richard Blackwood's face had gone red with fury. This is precisely the kind of naive idealism that has no place in a boardroom. We're a technology company, not a charity. Our obligation is to shareholders, not to every hard luck case this man drags in off the street. Your obligation is to build something that lasts. Nathan's voice was quiet now, but it carried to every corner of the room. My grandfather understood that. He was a construction worker who could barely afford breakfast, but when a waitress needed help, he organized an entire community to save her. He didn't do it for return on investment. He did it because that's what good people do. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph Eleanor had given him, Robert Cole and Margaret Sinclair, standing in front of the Millbrook Cares banner. This woman is Eleanor Sinclair's mother. The man next to her is my grandfather. 20 years ago, in a small town that most of you have never heard of, one act of kindness changed 2 lives. Margaret Sinclair survived her injuries because a stranger decided she was worth saving. Her daughter grew up believing that people could be good. And now Eleanor is trying to pass that forward to create a legacy of compassion that will outlast all of us. Nathan set the photograph on the table. You want to shut that down? Go ahead. Vote to end the program. Fire me. Do whatever makes your spreadsheets balance. But understand what you're really doing. You're not cutting costs. You're cutting hope. You're telling every struggling family in this city that they don't matter, that their pain is not profitable enough to address that kindness is a luxury we can't afford. The room was silent. Board members shifted in their seats, exchanging glances that carried volumes of unspoken communication. Richard Blackwood stood his chair scraping against the floor. This is emotional manipulation, nothing more. The board will not be swayed by sob stories and photographs. We have a fiduciary duty. Richard, the voice came from the doorway, weak but unmistakable. Eleanor Sinclair stood there leaning on Michael's arm, still wearing her hospital gown beneath an overcoat someone had thrown over her shoulders. Her face was pale, her hands trembling, but her eyes were sharp as ever. Eleanor, you should be in bed. One of the board members, a woman named Patricia Chen, who had always seemed sympathetic to the initiative, rose from her chair with concern. I'll rest when this is finished. Eleanor moved slowly to her seat at the head of the table, each step a small victory against her body's exhaustion. I heard there was a vote happening. I wanted to make sure my voice was counted. This meeting was called to discuss the company's direction during your recovery. Blackwood's voice had lost some of its confidence. There's no need for you to. There's every need. Eleanor sat down, and despite her obvious weakness, she somehow still commanded the room. Richard, I know what you've been doing. The leak to the press, the CPS report, the anonymous complaints to the State Labor Board. Did you think I wouldn't find out? The color drained from Blackwood's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Carl Hensley has spent the last month documenting your activities, the emails you thought you deleted, the payments to Thomas Webb for favorable coverage of your position, the coordination with board members to build support for your takeover. Eleanor's voice was ice. You've been planning to push me out for years. This program was just the excuse you were waiting for. This is absurd. These accusations are supported by evidence that will be presented to the full board within the week. Eleanor turned to the other members. I'm calling for a vote, not on the Second Chances initiative on Richard Blackwood's continued membership on this board. The vote was swift and decisive. 10-1 with only Blackwood voting in his own defense, the board moved to remove him pending a full investigation. Security escorted him from the building while he sputtered threats about lawsuits and defamation, his silver hair disheveled and his composure shattered. Nathan watched him go and felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph. Just exhaustion and the quiet knowledge that one battle had ended while the larger war continued. Eleanor was taken back to the hospital, but before she left, she gripped Nathan's hand with surprising strength. You did something today that I couldn't do. You made them feel it, not just understand feel. Her voice was barely a whisper. That's why I chose you, Nathan. That's why I'll always choose you. She was gone before he could respond, wheeled away by Michael and a team of anxious nurses. Nathan stood alone in the empty conference room, surrounded by leather chairs and polished wood, and wondered if this was what victory was supposed to feel like. The months that followed were the busiest of Nathan's life. With Blackwood gone and Eleanor recovering, the Second Chances initiative expanded faster than anyone had anticipated. New corporate partners signed on, drawn by the positive press coverage that had replaced the scandal. Government agencies reached out about potential collaborations. Other cities expressed interest in replicating the model. By the 6-month mark, the program had helped over 200 families. Nathan had hired a small team to handle the growing caseload, but he still insisted on meeting personally with every new applicant. He remembered what it felt like to be desperate to walk into an office expecting judgment and finding only forms and procedures. He would not let that happen to anyone who came through his door. The success brought its own challenges. Nathan found himself spending more time in meetings and less time with the families he was supposed to be helping. The paperwork multiplied, the politics intensified. Some days he felt more like a bureaucrat than an advocate, shuffling papers instead of changing lives. On those days, he would pull out his grandfather's photograph and remember why he had started. One evening in late September, 6 months after he had first walked into Sinclair Industries, Nathan stood at the window of his office and watched the sun set over Philadelphia. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold, the city's towers casting long shadows across streets filled with people heading home to families and dinners and the ordinary miracles of everyday life. Grace was thriving. The scholarship Eleanor had offered, the one Nathan had initially refused, was now helping her attend an arts program after school, nurturing a talent for drawing that Sarah would have loved to see. Mrs. Patterson had become something like a grandmother, teaching Grace to bake cookies and telling stories about the old days when Millbrook was nothing but farmland and forest. Nathan had kept his promise to work one shift a week at Maple Leaf Diner. Every Friday night he put on his old uniform and poured coffee and cleared tables, reminding himself of where he had come from. George had hired new servers to replace the ones who had moved on, but the rhythm of the place remained the same. Bill still sat at the counter telling stories. The coffee was still too strong. The pie was still the best thing on the menu. It was on one of those Friday nights near closing time that the circle finally completed itself. The diner was almost empty when the young man walked in. He was maybe 25, wearing work clothes stained with paint, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who had been working multiple jobs for too long. Nathan recognized that look. He had worn it himself not so long ago. The man sat at the counter and studied the menu with the careful attention of someone counting every dollar in his head. His hands were rough fingernails edged with dried pigment in colors that suggested something more than house painting. An artist, maybe. Someone with dreams that did not pay the bills. Long day, Nathan asked, setting down a cup of coffee without being asked. 3 days, actually. The man tried to laugh, but it came out hollow. I'm putting myself through art school. Everyone says I have talent, but talent doesn't cover rent. I know that feeling. They talked while Nathan wiped down the counter and the young man nursed his coffee. His name was Kevin. He was studying at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts, working 3 jobs to afford tuition, living in a studio apartment so small he had to paint in the hallway. He had sold a few pieces at student shows, but not enough to make a difference. Not enough to believe that his dreams might actually come true. When Kevin asked for his check, the total was $2.50. He pulled out his wallet and counted the bills inside 3 ones and some change barely enough to cover it. Nathan picked up the check and tore it in half. Someone paid it forward for you. Just remember to do the same someday. Kevin looked up, his eyes suddenly bright with tears he was trying not to shed. Seriously, seriously, go home, get some rest, and keep painting. The world needs more beauty in it. After Kevin left, Nathan cleared the counter and glanced toward the corner booth. His heart stopped. Eleanor Sinclair sat there, a cup of coffee and a slice of apple pie in front of her, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She was dressed simply tonight, dark slacks, a cream sweater, and she looked healthier than she had in months. The color had returned to her face. The shadows under her eyes had faded. Nathan walked over, dish towel still in his hands. You know, most CEOs don't hang out in diners at midnight. Most CEOs don't know what they're missing. She finished her coffee and stood placing 2 bills on the table. A 50 and another 50. $100 more than Nathan would make in tips for the entire week. Beneath the money was a folded note. Nathan picked it up and read the precise handwriting. You're doing great. Keep going. E.S. He looked up, but Eleanor was already walking toward the door. She paused with her hand on the glass and turned back to face him. That young man you just helped. His name is Kevin. He's a painter, a good one. Putting himself through art school. Eleanor's smile deepened. He's going to be fine, because someone saw him, just like someone saw you. She pushed through the door and disappeared into the night. Nathan stood holding the note and the money, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him. He walked to the register and put the $100 in the tip jar where it would be split among all the servers tomorrow morning. But the note he kept. Outside, the October air was crisp and clean, the kind of night when stars were visible, even through the light pollution of the suburbs. Nathan locked up the diner and walked to his car, the same 15-year-old Honda that still needed new brakes but had somehow kept running through everything. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. Love you, Daddy. See you in the morning. He typed back, love you too, sweetheart. More than all the stars. Sitting in the parking lot, Nathan thought about the journey that had brought him here. A year ago, he had been a waiter working double shifts, barely surviving, convinced that the world had forgotten people like him. Then Eleanor Sinclair had walked into his diner, left 0 tip, and a note that changed everything. He thought about his grandfather, Robert Cole, who had helped a stranger because it was the right thing to do, who had planted a seed of kindness without knowing it would bloom into something that touched hundreds of lives. He thought about Eleanor's mother, Margaret, who had raised her daughter alone, working 2 jobs, never giving up hope, even when hope seemed foolish. He thought about Sarah, who had believed in people with a faith that still amazed him, who had made him promise to give Grace the life she deserved. He thought about Grace herself, 7 years old and already wiser than he would ever be, who had asked him the question that cut through all his fear and doubt. If you can help other kids like me, why don't you? The answer had seemed so complicated at the time, so tangled up in fear and pride and the scars of being overlooked for too long. But Grace had seen the truth clearly, the way children often do. The only thing stopping him from helping others was himself. Nathan started the car and drove home through streets that felt different than they had a year ago. The same broken sidewalks, the same flickering streetlights, the same tired buildings that had seen better days. But now he saw possibility where he had once seen only decay. Every window was a family that might need help. Every lit doorway was a story waiting to be told. He could not save everyone. He knew that now. The weight of other people's pain could crush you if you tried to carry it all. But he could save some, could make a difference in lives that would ripple outward in ways he would never see. That was enough. That had to be enough. When he got home, Grace was asleep. Mr. Buttons clutched to her chest, her face peaceful in the glow of the nightlight. Nathan stood in the doorway and watched her breathe the same way he had done 1,000 times before. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt like an ending and a beginning wrapped together. He had kept his promise to Sarah. Not perfectly. Nothing was ever perfect, but truly. Grace had a home and a father who loved her, and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. She would never have to count coins for pencils or learn not to ask for things she wanted. She would grow up knowing that she was valued, that she mattered, that the world had a place for her. And maybe someday she would pass that knowledge forward, would help someone else the way her father had been helped, would plant her own seeds of kindness and watch them bloom into something beautiful. Nathan pulled Grace's door almost closed, leaving a crack for the hallway light, and walked to his own room. He sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Eleanor's note from his pocket, reading it one more time. "You're doing great. Keep going." He folded the note and placed it in the drawer of his nightstand, next to the photograph of his grandfather and the wedding ring that Sarah had worn until the day she died. Treasures from different chapters of his life gathered together in a small wooden box that held everything that mattered. Tomorrow there would be more work, more families to help, more battles to fight, more moments of doubt and frustration and exhaustion. The world did not stop being cruel just because you decided to be kind. But tonight, Nathan Cole was at peace. He lay down in the darkness and closed his eyes, listening to the sounds of the building settling around him. Grace's soft breathing through the thin walls, a car passing on the street below. The distant hum of a city that never quite slept. Somewhere out there, Kevin the painter was going home to his tiny studio apartment, carrying with him the memory of a stranger's kindness. Tomorrow he would paint something beautiful, and someday when he had made it, he would help someone else. The circle would continue. Somewhere out there, Maria Santos was putting her children to bed in an apartment with rooms for everyone, thinking about how far she had come from the desperate woman who had walked into Nathan's office 6 months ago. She would tell her children someday about the program that had saved them. And maybe those children would grow up to save others. Somewhere out there, Frank Delgado was closing up his restaurant for the night, counting the day's receipts and marveling at the life he had built from nothing. He would hire more people from the program, would pay it forward in ways both large and small, would become a pillar of the community he had once felt excluded from. And somewhere out there, Eleanor Sinclair was driving home through the city she had helped build, thinking about her mother and Nathan's grandfather, and the strange threads of fate that connected them all. She would continue the work, would expand the program, would spend her billions on something that mattered more than stock prices and quarterly reports. The kindness that Robert Cole had shown to Margaret Sinclair 20 years ago had not ended with them. It had rippled forward through time, touching lives that Robert would never know about, creating possibilities he could never have imagined. And now Nathan was part of that river, carrying the current forward, adding his own kindness to the flow. Some tips were not measured in dollars, some tips changed lives. And some tips kept changing them, rippling outward in ways you could never predict, connecting strangers across decades and distances and circumstances that should have kept them apart. From Margaret Sinclair to a construction worker who could barely afford breakfast. From that worker to his grandson pouring coffee in a diner at the edge of town. From Nathan to Maria and Frank and Harold and Kevin and hundreds of others whose names he would never know. The note in his drawer felt warm somehow, as if it held more than just words on paper. It held a legacy, a promise, a reminder that kindness was never wasted even when you could not see where it would lead. Nathan Cole fell asleep with a smile on his face, dreaming of his daughter and his grandfather and all the people he had helped and all the people he would help tomorrow. The world was still cruel, still unfair, still full of Richard Blackwoods, who believed that money was the only measure of worth. But it was also full of Eleanor Sinclairs and Frank Delgados and 7-year-old girls who asked the questions that mattered most. It was full of strangers who saw each other, really saw each other, and chose to help instead of look away. And as long as that was true, there was hope. There was always hope.